What's up you guys, Sasha here. ETFs are a great way of investing in a portfolio of companies or other types of investments in a relatively passive way. Whether you're interested in investing in a particular sector, whether you want to track a particular index, whether you're interested in groups of commodities or any other mixed bag of investments, ETFs allow you to do this relatively easily. Investing money into an ETF means you don't have to actively manage a portfolio, you don't have to do frequent trades, you don't have to worry about ensuring that the distribution of the companies in your portfolio is quite right. The ETF will do all of that for you for a relatively modest fee. Whenever you go and watch YouTube videos or read content about ETFs, there are some really great options out there. For example, VU, which is the S&P 500 index, is really good, and also there is ARKK portfolio that focuses on tech companies that has become very, very popular over the last couple of years because of their level of performance. However, the big issue is that neither of those two, as well as many other ETFs, are actually available in the UK and Europe, even though they are available in the US because of differences in regulation around how these ETFs report their data. And that means you can't invest in those ETFs if you're based in the UK or Europe unless you use Etoro, who just happened to be the sponsor for this video. Now, Etoro allow you to do a really neat trick, and I very frequently tell people that people should not go and get into leverage trading. People should not go and invest in CFDs if they don't know what they're doing, if they don't know how CFDs work, and I stick by that. But you can use the fact that Etoro offer a platform where CFDs and regular trading are part of the same thing to invest in ETFs that you can't invest directly into. You can invest in them through buying a CFD that has no leverage. Because you're buying the CFD with no leverage, which is sort of against the point of CFDs in the first place, you're actually benefiting from not having any of the increased risk associated with highly leveraged products. In addition, Etoro don't actually charge any of the usual CFD fees because you are not using any leverage with the CFD, which essentially means that you can kind of invest in those ETFs without holding the underlying assets, of course, because you're not buying the actual stocks, but you get to benefit in exactly the same way as if you were buying into those portfolios. The one fee that does apply that I wanted to mention is that there is a spread of 0.09%, which is essentially a cost of buying in and buying out indirectly, but that is really, really low for the privilege of being able to invest in things that otherwise you really can't. And I am a big fan of this little trick, but if you want to go and check Etoro out, if you want to go and see what it's like, you can go and use my link in the description below to go and do that. Just remember there is a minimum deposit of $200, so if you want to go and try out the platform, you will have to put at least that much in when you're setting up the account. Now, a really brief disclaimer, I am not a financial advisor. I cannot provide financial advice to you, and if you do need financial advice, please go and seek the help of a suitably qualified professional. This is just all based on my personal opinion. Now, let's get into the list. There's going to be 5 different ETFs that I'm going to go through, but I'm not going to go through them in any particular level of detail because I simply don't have the time. Hopefully over the next few weeks, I'll go into a lot more depth on some of these. But anyway, without further ado, let's dive into number 1. Number 1, I have the most obvious option in this list, which you might have heard me mention before, which is the VUSD. This is a Vanguard portfolio which mimics the S&P 500 index. It is basically the list of the 500 largest companies in the US based on how Standard & Poor's defines it, and you get to go and invest into that portfolio for a very, very low fee of just 0.07%. I like to keep about 10% of my portfolio invested in reasonably robust index-based ETFs, and this one alongside its cousin VUSA, which is exactly the same but priced in pounds rather than dollars, are the two that comprise probably the big bulk of them. Now, the big reason why I like to invest in this ETF is because as it stands, the entire world is relying on tools, products, and services produced by big American companies, including Apple, Microsoft, and Google, as well as Amazon and Facebook dominating the relative spheres within which they operate as well. Now, having a portfolio that is heavily centered on all of these innovative companies for a very, very low fee, given the growth that all these companies are experiencing and the entire sector is experiencing, something that I really like, and that's why this is the first one in my list. Now, although the S&P 500 is heavily based on tech, if you're wanting to go even deeper, there is another ETF that I really like, which is the Invesco Nasdaq 100 ETF. It is the EQQQ ticker symbol. As with Vanguard S&P 500 ETF that I just mentioned, there are 2 versions. There's the EQGB, which goes in pounds, and the EQQQ, which goes in dollars. I'm not going to go into the depths in this video as to why those 2 exist. I have a separate video I'm going to link in the description below if you are interested in that. But the EQQQ is a tracker that focuses on the largest non-finance companies that trade on Nasdaq. And Nasdaq is basically where most of, in fact, pretty much all the big US tech giants are listed. And that means that you have a much higher exposure to those tech giants by investing in this ETF. One really big reason I like it is because some tech-specific ETFs actually exclude some of the bigger tech companies that I think are still tech because they think they're too old school and they're not as tech as maybe they once were. So a lot of them will, for example, exclude Google and Amazon, even though I quite like having some of my money invested in those. And that's why this particular one is really good for me. It's not specific for tech. It does have some diversification in it, although tech is going to be by far the biggest component of this index. The fee is a little bit expensive. It is 0.3%, but I think the ability to go and invest in those companies relatively straightforwardly, like they allow you to, is good enough for that fee. Next on my list, the iShares MSCI Emerging Markets, ticker IEEM. This is a bit of a different kind of ETF. It invests in companies in up-and-coming countries all over the world. This fund has a lot of big Asian tech manufacturers, ones that maybe people haven't heard of, but ones that actually produce a lot of the chips and a lot of the tech that goes into technology that many people have heard of. And I really like the fact that they go and invest in essentially the people who the big tech companies hire to do their actual work. For me, this particular type of company in this particular type of country is a sector that's going to be growing over a long period of time. I think it's nowhere near its potential just yet. This ETF frequently returns double-digit growth, but it can also return really strong downturns as well. It is much more volatile than some of the other ones. The annual management fee is 0.18%, which I think is really good based on the performance that this ETF is delivering and that I think it can deliver in the future. Next, let's go to the iShares Global Clean Energy, INRG. This is a very different ETF to all the other ones I'm going to talk about. It is a relatively small portfolio. It only has 30 companies or thereabouts that are focused on delivering clean energy. And this one might sound somewhat altruistic. It might sound like I'm investing in it because it's nice, it's nice to invest in clean energy. It's good for the future. It's good for the environment. And that might be partly true. But there's also a big financial sense in this as well. Countries all over the world are becoming much more focused on clean energy. They're much more focused on improving their environment. They're much more focused on going carbon neutral and all of these things. Denmark has just announced a big island that they're building where they're going to be producing a colossal amount of renewable energy on this island to power them and neighboring countries as well. This is something that's going to be growing massively over the coming years and I think even decades. And as a result, this is a way for me to invest in all the big companies that are playing in this space without having to know that much about the energy sector, which I don't, if I'm honest with you. And because it allows me to go and invest in it for a relatively modest 0.65% fee, I mean, it is expensive, but the growth potential here, I think, is so high that that fee is actually warranted that I'm quite interested in doing it. And that's why I actually have some money invested in this ETF as well. Next on my list, the iShares S&P 500 Information Technology sector, ticker IUIT. This is in some ways similar to the EQQQ that I mentioned earlier, but this one has some seriously nuts characteristics, which is why I particularly like it. You see, this one picks out some tech companies from the S&P 500 which target high growth. The definition of tech here is limited, like I mentioned earlier. It doesn't include all the companies that maybe some people would attribute to be tech. For example, Apple and Microsoft are both in this one, but Google, Tesla, and Amazon are not. There is also definitely an element of overexposure in this ETF for sure. While some other funds maybe have as much as 10%, in some cases 12% in the top company within the ETF, here, Apple and Microsoft combined have over 40% share in this ETF between them. But despite the very high volatility, this ETF can really deliver. 3 of the last 4 years, average returns of 40% or thereabouts, which is insane. The fee is just 0.15%, which is also really nice. Now, if you guys found this useful, if you liked it, please make sure you go and smash the like button for the YouTube algorithm so that this video can reach more people. If you enjoyed this video and watched this far, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys later.